SEO is dead. You've heard it everywhere lately, especially with ChatGPT, AI, GEO, search taking over. But here's the truth that most people are missing. These AI models are actually still using Google as their foundation. They're not replacing SEO just yet. They're changing how it works. I'm Matt, your host of Cartworthy. I do e-commerce marketing at KlientBoost. And today I'm talking with my colleague, Seth Trammell. He's the director of SEO with me at KlientBoost. Seth and our SEO team have worked with dozens of e-commerce brands, helping them navigate exactly this shift, where Google's going, where LLMs are pulling their data from, and what this means for your organic traffic. But here's where it gets interesting. Seth's going to show you why most brands are optimizing for the wrong things. He's going to break down the 3 specific areas where e-com and DTC brands should be focusing their SEO efforts in 2025, heading into 2026. Let's get into it.
All right, Seth, let's get right into it. Who should be worrying about SEO? When, how, why? Give me the quick overview and summary of a brand, 7 figures, low 8 figures, of how they should approach SEO and who it's for.
So I have to start by saying, contrary to a lot of reports out there, if you're reading in a lot of, there's a lot of publications out there ready to trumpet that, SEO is dead. And if you followed SEO for any amount of time, this is a yearly occurrence. And so we're not, unused to dealing with this. But right now there is this kind of like perceived existential threat coming from LLMs. And the burgeoning market, I would say maybe, of what is still not fully agreed upon what it will be called, of GEO or AIEO or some, combination of letters that will signify what it means to optimize in those spaces. And there's a lot of corollaries. There's a lot of overlap between what happens there and what happens in traditional SEO. And that is probably reason one why I would say SEO is very much not dead. These models are, to this point, still reliant on Google as a ground for a lot of what they're doing when it comes to making recommendations, when people are doing research around products in other areas. They use these as a great ground because, you know what? Google's got a great system built up that they've, over the years. You're not going to topple that overnight. A lot has been made about how much, things like ChatGPT and others are growing, but search market share wise, they still are just a fraction of what Google's doing. So yeah, they're taking up more all the time, but it's still not, we're talking a couple percent versus, 90% of what people are doing. I think too, what will sometimes happen in marketing circles, or when we're even, thinking about people who are in these positions at these brands, there's maybe perhaps an overestimation of public adoption and public understanding and usage of these tools because we use them. We're sometimes even forced to use them in various positions. But the average person, I think, isn't changing quite as much as we are in our specific fields. I think right now it is there is a loop that happens when people are doing their product research. There are some who do not utilize these tools at all. And they just stick with Google because it's not broke. No need to fix it. And then there are the ones who are like, okay, I'm going to use this new tool. And a lot of times they'll start on Google, use ChatGPT, for instance, to get more information, do more research about a product. And then, because ChatGPT is not great at providing links to things, they'll go back to Google. And what happens then, though, is instead of a non-branded search, they're doing specific branded searches. It's navigational searches that they're doing instead of perhaps, yes, these are still going to be commercial and transactional, but they're not doing it in a broad sense. They're doing it in a very narrow sense where they're like, okay, I've decided on what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to go right to that brand. So yeah, SEO still matters. How you influence your visibility within these models is very much, people may say SEO is dead and GEO is the new king, but then they'll go and recommend basic SEO best practices that we've done for the last 5 years as like what you need to do. So there's also a concern too, I think, if you over leverage yourself into just going into, LLM based optimizations, that you might end up doing things that are not good on the organic side and end up cutting off your nose to spite your face a little bit. One area where I think this is probably we're most likely to see a change coming up is in the types of content right now that LLMs like to surface. If you go in and you ask ChatGPT to give you recommendations on a product. The most common things that are going to be cited are third-party kind of affiliate style content, listicles, 10 best articles, that kind of stuff. A lot of that stuff is pay to play. A lot of that stuff is, just classic affiliate marketing. And then you're going to also see articles from the products themselves where they are rating themselves against their competitors. And guess who wins? They do. And I think eventually it's going to be to the model's benefit to do less of that. And to maybe look more at how can we actually provide non-biased answers when this is happening and filter out some of these things that are kind of very clearly biased, or even maybe filter out some of the stuff where it is, pay to play, where it's who's there? Well, whoever paid the most. So I think it's going to be to their benefit to eventually bring that into play. They're just not there yet. And so if you're optimizing now around trying to get as much of that as possible, it may work in the short term, but you may find yourself on the outside looking in when you've neglected to invest in just best practices and providing accurate information, answer the questions that people are asking about your product in an honest way. So the long and short of it, of my answer is SEO is still very, very important to most brands in an e-commerce space. I think it's just going to be how you employ it, what you're selling sometimes, or how you're trying, that's going to impact what you need to do. There's very much no one size fits all answer when we look at SEO. It's very much, every brand, every segment is going to have their specific needs, what's going to work for them versus, what's going to work for another. And so that's where expertise is really important in knowing, all right, what levers do we need to pull to get you, the results that are going to make a difference for you at the end of the day.
Yeah. Amazing start. We got a quick crash course. So SEO is not dead. SEO is not dead. And you said it's important for most brands still. What brand, if a brand is listening, what would be those main type of verticals or styles or categories that you would recommend they invest in SEO sooner than later if they are at that low seven figure, low 8-figure and haven't made it a huge priority just yet? What are some of the few main big factors or brands?
A lot of what I will look at is, first is brand presence. There are brands out there that do really well in terms of the main traffic that comes to their site organically is through branded search. That's great. That's also got a lot of influence coming from other channels, typically. So one thing I will say is don't look at SEO as a way to give up on another channel. It is an augment. And where I think it's best is when you can augment the non-branded section. What you don't want to do is say, oh, we have SEO now, we can back off on paid search or paid social, because those are driving other those are going to drive that branded traffic a lot of times. You want to keep that, but you can't really optimize too much around it in a lot of regards. So what you want to try and oftentimes attack is those areas, those non-branded broad areas where people are going to go and be in that kind of exploration phase of figuring out okay, I know I want to buy this type of product. Now I need to narrow down who I'm going to buy it from. And so you want to show up in those spaces wherever possible. How to show up, though, depends very much on these days what you're selling, because Google has, over the last couple of years, dramatically reformed what SERPs, it's a alphabetism that means search engine results page, what these look like, depending on what it is you're selling. So there are areas where I will say, hey, the best way that you're going to show up here is by optimizing around your collections pages. You need to have collections pages are super valuable to Google because they understand that people like options. And so if you've got a collections page, let's say, 5, 6, 7, 8 more, the more the better, varieties of a particular type of product, then you're probably a fit for those broad match keywords that people are going to be using. But, let's say you've only got 1 or 2 varieties. Well, it's going to be a lot harder to fit you in there because Google's going to go to, maybe call them aggregators or sometimes big box stores who are going to give people that breadth of options that they're going to be looking for. So you got to meet people where they're going to be, and Google knows pretty well what people want to see when they get there. So if that's not your jam, well, then you got to go to the hyper specific. And in a lot of these places where you'll have collection pages ruling the kind of, the classic 10 blue link area, there's also going to be these panels of products these elements like, best products near me, that kind of stuff. And so that requires a far more granular level of, it's almost at this point technical SEO, because we're looking at optimizing that product page to show up in ultimately Merchant Center. Merchant Center kind of drives those product graphs that show up. And so that is about having really detailed information on your product page, and then also having really good structured data that calls that all out in a nice machine readable format. And then also optimizing your organic product feed, which, to be honest, I think a lot of people ignore. They don't even realize it's there because Merchant Center is such a paid driven Google product. But organic feeds exist. They just oftentimes get overlooked. And so it's one of those areas where, all right, if I can't fit in there because I don't have enough different types of products to be a collection page, well, then I need to figure out how my individual product is going to make it into one of those graphs. And so, yeah, that's getting into the very technical. But when we think about the collections pages and how you want to rank there, well, my strategy there is going to be more often than not backlinking. Still, I think a really big factor in how Google is making determinations on what sites and pages to trust or to elevate when they're trying to recommend a specific product type. So there it's all about, having your collection page be mentioned with, relevant anchor text and then pointed to by sites that are, one, relevant, two, authoritative. And by that, I do not mean have a high DR or a DA. Those are nice little benchmarks, but to be frank, those are third-party metrics that are very, very gameable. And so you also need to look at the kind of traffic that site that you're getting that link from receives. These are all things that we do here when we're making these kinds of assessments. And so it's all about, providing good link value to those pages. And you'll oftentimes see that the competitors who are winning are doing the same things. And so those are the big suggestions that we make here when it comes to like, all right, how do we start winning in these spaces? What do we need to do? Well, what do you do?
Yeah. So amazing collection pages. That's for more broad terms, more specifically, more on the product pages, and then the Merchant Center for the organic listings, the technical data structure to show up in those suggested products alongside the paid shopping ad little snippets at the top. So
Yes.
Those are the three main things you would say is like kind of the main areas and focus buckets for brands. And I did not hear anything about lots of blog posts. So tell me why not blog posts to start out?
Well, blogs have their place, but I have a saying I throw out quite often, which is SEOs ruin everything, because a lot of the web and a lot of people, honestly, like honest dissatisfaction with how Google results work is because of the work of SEOs over the years of flooding question areas with, blogs that are, sometimes for better or worse, reproductions of something else that aren't adding anything new to the conversation. And sometimes too, it's by brands that have no right to be talking about these topics. And when I say brands, I go as far as too as like the publishers, because we're not that far removed from points when I think some of the bigger ones still do because they can get away with it, of just writing about everything under the sun. I remember I was at one point looking at, I think it was Healthline, writing articles about how to recycle tires. What are you doing? Well, at that point, it was like, we're Healthline. And they were ranking for it too, by the way. They're like number 4. This is like over a year ago. It's like, well, we're Healthline. Google trusts us. We can get away with it. And so to that, I would say blogs still have a purpose and a value, but for every site, it's going to be different. And I do a lot of competitor research here among who's winning this spaces to get an idea of what the value is, and then look at these informational spaces and see, well, who is getting surfaced here? Is Google trusting brands to give this kind of information, or is Google saying, no, I'm going with publishers for this? And I'd say too, the bar has been raised for content in a big way. For years, it has been, it was first EAT, and then morphed into EEAT, which is, experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. These are kind of ephemeral factors that Google looks for when they're assessing whether or not you're worthy to give an answer on a topic. And what they're looking for are honestly the same thing that people are looking for these days. When you go and when you're asking a question and you pull up an article and there is no author byline, and it just says written by website team. And then you've got a wall of text article with links pointing to God knows where. And that's supposed to be your answer. A lot of people tune out at this point. But when you have an author byline and then you get an idea of, you get to see that author's credentials, their experience in this area, basically, why should I trust this person? You as a user are more inclined to stay there. At least I know I am, but I'm also kind of jaded. And so Google's looking for the same stuff at the end of the day. And so if you are, as a brand, going to write about a topic, you need to use your experience, or you need to go out and get experience in that in order to prove that you're worth being able to talk about that topic. So for, a lot of brands out there, you're going to have probably some internal expertise that knows this topic inside and out. It's a matter of, do they have the time to devote to being an aid in this process, on being able to lend their name and their experience to this, to make your content unique, to give you a viewpoint that isn't just a recycling of what else is out there. And so that's where we're moving to. That's the future. And LLMs are the same way. They're looking for those same signals, quite frankly, because none of them are benefited by giving an answer that isn't backed by expertise. They all, at the end of the day, that's a bad user experience if it goes wrong. And so they're incentivized to do the same thing. So if you're going to get in there, one needs to make sense. It needs to be like, you need to see brands like you showing up when people are, when you're typing in these queries. And then you need to be able to be at the highest level of providing experience and expertise here to be able to show that you have the authority and the trustworthiness to show up. So yes, it's still a factor. It's just really, it's a lot more goes into it than it used to.
Yep. Makes sense. It's way more nuanced and contextualized. And from what I'm gathering, it's probably a little bit lower on the priority list compared to collection, product page, and the organic feed that you meant, as you mentioned.
In terms of providing that direct conversion value, absolutely.
Yep.
One of the things I think when I was early on in my SEO career, one of the hardest conversations I had to have was I would go in, I'd be really excited because a blog post that we wrote popped off and it was pulling in tens of thousands of clicks every month or something like that. And then getting that response of, cool. So how many sales did that get us? And being, and then going to, Universal Analytics or GA4 and trying to look up, how much and then seeing like, $36 or something, because at the end of the day, top of funnel informational content isn't a conversion point. You're catching people at a stage when they're not buying things. Sure, you can get a couple every now and then who, because, you put, nice little call outs to your products in there, you can get a couple people to go over, or you can get a couple people to go further in the site and find, oh yeah, I do want to buy something, but you're not really catching them in that phase when they're ready. So what I'm trying to do lately is kind of change the narrative around what it means for content to be successful. What it's really good at is driving new users to your site, people who aren't perhaps already familiar with your brand, but they aren't there to buy. And so what we can do there is bring them in and allow them to be utilized by other channels. I think too often SEO gets viewed as almost like monolithic, like it is like it works outside of the rest of your marketing channels and it needs to do everything for itself. But really, no, they're always all going to be interconnected. And so where I think great value from content can come is by bringing people into kind of remarketing funnels and getting them into, getting them to sign up for email, getting them to sign up for SMS. So that way, as they're, later on, as they're ready to make a purchase, you've been in their inbox. You're now top of mind. As a marketer, I like to think that I'm immune to a lot of tactics, but I consistently will go back to brands that are in my email that are hitting me up with SMSs, and I will go back and buy from them. So maybe it's a bias thing there. I'm like, well, if it works on me, it must work on everybody else too. But I think that like those channels do have higher end conversion rates because you're capturing them when they're ready. And so, yeah, they're not going to convert at that point when they're there reading your blog. But if you get them to sign up because you've presented to them a value with the content that you've given, then you have a really good chance of getting them later when they are ready. And so that's the kind of changing paradigm for value I am trying to propose around content is don't think about it as a conversion driver from that perspective. Think of your conversion as the email sign up.
Awesome. Makes sense to me. So let's start to wrap up this first intro episode to SEO. We'll have you back on for a bunch of subsequent specific deep dives as well. What are kind of in the next week or two, if someone's listening to this, is like, cool, I've ignored SEO up until this point. Yes, Seth told me about collection pages and PDPs in my organic feed. What are like 3 small, tangible next steps for someone to start making progress in the next week or two and digging into SEO and start getting some progress, some traction, some lift in the right direction?
I think the biggest thing to do is understand very well where you're being successful organically. And the best place to do that is in Google Search Console. That is the first party tool where you can see the click and impression and click through rate data that is going to let you know, all right, where am I finding success? And if you go in and you look at those queries and you see that your brand name is, part of most of the queries that are driving, or if you go into the pages section and you see it's your home page, that's the primary driver, then you've got potential. You've got an opportunity there to build things that aren't currently driving you traffic and optimize. So let's say that you've got that you're a site where you've got lots of products and you've got collection pages, but you don't see those as being what's driving clicks. Where you see the only time that they do is when your name's attached to it. All right, you've got an opportunity right there. And you want to start thinking about, all right, well, what are the broad ways that people could get to this page? And you may be benefited by, or there are a lot of tools out there that can show you some of the search volumes out there around these tools that should be helpful in making those decisions. Personally, here we use Ahrefs, but SEMrush, Moz, they're all, pretty much alike. Ahrefs is particularly good because it has great backlink data. So that next step might be, if you have one of these tools available to you, is to go and look at, well, who's winning those spaces and how are they doing with backlinks? Are they out there? Are they getting backlinks to these pages that's helping to fuel their growth? And then you might know, okay, well, this is an area where I need to invest into. This is something I need to start looking at if I want to make my way into these spaces too.
Awesome. Sweet. I think that's it for now. Well, thanks so much for your time, and we'll catch you on the next SEO episodes.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Seth.
The big takeaway here, SEO is not dead, but the strategy has evolved. If you're just getting started, stop chasing blog traffic and start optimizing your collection pages, your product feeds, and your merchant center organic listings. That's where the real opportunity is for you, 7- and 8-figure brands right now. Huge thanks again to Seth for breaking down exactly what's working in 2025. If you want to see how Seth and our KlientBoost team approach SEO strategy, check us out, KlientBoost.com. Please leave me your feedback, what topics you want to see more of, what formats, if you're interested in being a guest on the show, or want to recommend and suggest someone to me to dive deep and narrow on a subtopic in e-com for 7- and 8-figure brands, please let me know. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Cartworthy. Catch you on the next one.